On this image, I don't think this is one I can show a client. They're not going to think I'm that great of a photographer, right? Because they're going to go, yeah. So in this case, I don't like what's happening in the bright part of the picture. The sky's too bright. And I don't like what's happening in the dark part of the picture. The horses are too dark. So I could use the shadows and highlights sliders. But I'm not going to right now. The time that I don't is when I would need to move them both in opposite directions. If that's what you need to do, that's what contrast does. Contrast controls how big of a difference is there between bright things and dark things. As you increase contrast, bright things get brighter, dark things get darker. It should make this image even worse. As the dark horses get even darker, the bright sky gets even brighter. So increasing contrast in this case will not be a good thing. So increasing contrast, bright things brighter, dark things get darker. Decreasing contrast does the opposite. The bright things are going to darken up a bit. The dark things are going to brighten up a bit. What happens is when you lower contrast, things become more similar looking. So the brights and darks become less extreme. So in this case, if I bring that down, it might not be enough, but do you notice my sky when I bring it down is getting darker? And do you notice that the horses that are here are getting a little bit lighter? So that's one thing I could do. In this case, it's just that the image is too extreme. If it wasn't so extreme, if those horses didn't look for the most part black, then that probably would have been enough right there to lower contrast. Contrast, I'm trying to think of how to best describe it. If you can look at me, camera people, and imagine my laptop right here. Imagine this right here is a histogram. It's going to take, let's see, I got to think about your view of this. So is this where black is? No, this is where black is for you guys, your view. This is black, this is white. It's going to take whatever's here and either expand them to make them more different than each other or put them closer together, make them more similar. And so it grabs the kind of a third of the way in on each side of the histogram. It either pushes the stuff closer together, which means more similar, or spreads them further apart, which means more different. Not everybody's comfortable thinking about histograms at all. In fact, most people aren't. So that might not help you, but for those of you that do connect to the idea of a histogram, that might be a useful thought. So anyway, I lowered contrast, which got the sky and the horses to be a little bit more similar in brightness. They weren't so extreme. And then I can just do these like we did on other images. So right now, the sky doesn't bug me that much because it's not a huge part of the image as far as what's important. The horses are what bug me. It's the dark part of the image, so you can probably guess what I'm going to grab. Shadows, right? So I'm going to bring shadows up. And now we can start seeing what was in that dark area. Okay. Now, anytime you bring contrast down, you're going to make your image look more dull than it was previously. And most people don't like what their images look like when they're dull. So there's another slider in here that peps your image up. Regardless of what it looked like before, it's going to make it snap, make it pop, make it just jump off the page kind of thing. And that's one called clarity. Clarity actually emphasizes the detail. It's like make the detail pop out. So anytime I lower contrast, I almost always increase clarity to compensate. Because otherwise the image can look really dull. But I'll use clarity on most images anyway. So I'm going to move clarity to the right. And like watch the grass possibly. See it just kind of jump out more, or bring it down, up. So that's going to bring some snap back into the image that I might have lost when I ended up adjusting my contrast. All right? I can click on the little icon, remember the lower right corner, the one that looks like little slider bars. Click once, there's before. Click again, you see how much more usable it is. There are other things that would make this image look a lot better, but we just haven't talked about them yet. One is down here we have vibrance and saturation. They control how colorful your image is. With both of them, move them towards the right, your image becomes more colorful. Move them to the left, they become less colorful. Both vibrance and saturation. So I might pump up the color a little bit, get it more colorful in there. Okay, yes?
What does this do to your noise? Since we've
Not
extremely
much.
okay.
Well, I mean, what's going to happen?
Is it because you adjusted the contrast?
Well, if you're talking about the vibrance slider is not going to do much to my noise. Brightening the horses is what did the stuff to my noise. And it didn't do it to my noise. It just made the noise easy to see. The noise was there. It was just as noisy in the horses before. I just made that bright enough where I can see the noise. So the brightening the horses is what affected noise. Bringing up vibrance is not affecting noise in general.
But does the contrast affect that? So these are really dark to begin with. So when you adjusted the contrast.
Yeah, regardless of what the name of the slider is, if anything that was dark gets bright, you're making it easier to see the noise that was there. Okay? Regardless of what slider. So yes, if I bring down contrast and that's part of how the horses got brighter, it's not a matter of what the slider is doing, it's just there's noise in the really dark part of your picture. If you make it so it's no longer the really dark part of your picture, instead it's a normal part, now the noise is in the normal part of your picture. That's the mindset I'd have. So it doesn't matter what slider you move to do it. Okay? Now, vibrance and saturation, what the heck's the difference? Because they seem to do the same thing. Saturation treats all colors equally so that every color gets an equal boost to make it more colorful. Vibrance concentrates instead on mellow colors, areas that are not that colorful to begin with. And with vibrance, it applies less and less and less as it gets into the areas that are already colorful. So if you have a red car in your picture and it's red, I mean it's ridiculously red to begin with. Everything else in the picture looks mellow. If you were to move up saturation, which treats all colors equally, the red car is going to look artificial. It's already so red that it's crazy red. You're going to tell it, go even redder than crazy red, and it's going to start looking artificial. It's going to start looking like somebody drew it instead of took a picture of it. Okay? But if you bring up vibrance, vibrance is going to take everything else in the picture that's not all that colorful to begin with. It's going to boost that, make it more colorful, and it's going to apply less and less as it gets towards that red car that's already overly colorful. And so I use vibrance more often than saturation because it's too easy to overdo things that are already colorful. And what happens is when you overdo something that's already colorful, it loses detail. When you had a red car where you could see the shading that gave it form, it gave it shape, suddenly the shading starts to go away and it becomes a solid red car with no shadows, no highlights. It's just a red blob. That's a thing called saturation clipping. That's the technical term for it. We clipped away the detail that was there. Okay? So vibrance is what's used most commonly. Vibrance also has a couple other things, some that are good, some that are bad. With vibrance, it will try not to oversaturate skin. Because if you make a picture with a person in it more colorful, they can look sunburnt pretty quickly. If you take the red on my nose and stuff, make it even redder, that kind of stuff. Vibrance is going to do less to skin. Also, vibrance is going to darken and prefer blue things. The most common blue thing in a photo, sky. And people like darker blue skies. So when you crank up vibrance, you're going to find the blue things get darker and more colorful, more so than in any other color. And that can be a problem too, if you don't have a sky. Instead, you got a blue car, or you got something else that's blue. Or in this case, those horses actually look somewhat blue because I haven't color corrected the picture. And bringing up vibrance will exaggerate that because it over messes with blue. So anyway, saturation is a pretty simple thing. It just means make everything more colorful, more or less. Vibrance is much more sophisticated. It says mainly make the mellow things more colorful and be careful of skin and overdo your sky, that kind of stuff. So most people use vibrance more so than saturation. All right, this image, at this point, look at the bar chart. You see a gap on the left side? Or if there's anything over there, it's so small it almost is nothing. That means there's really no black, or if there is a black, it's a speck. So I could take the black slider, bring her down, till that kisses the end, and it might give me more density in the darkest part of the horse because we over-brightened the horse so much that nothing ended up being black in it. Right now, the main thing that I don't like is I might be able to adjust the sky a little bit, but horse-wise is the color. They look a little blue to me. I'm going to work on some other images for color, but in general, these two sliders are what lets you shift the color. And if you move this slider, let's say this way, you're moving at the same time away from blue, and you make the image look less blue, and at the same time make it look more yellow. Because yellow is the opposite of blue. And it's like a seesaw or a teeter-totter, where if I have blue in one hand and yellow in the other, and we have too much blue to begin with in the horses, to reduce the blue, you're automatically increasing the other, because they're the opposites. One color absorbs the other. So it might be a little mentally different as far as thinking it, but if I move it this way, it means make the horses less blue. And at the same time, it means more yellow, but I'm not going to notice them becoming yellow until all the blue's away. If we absorbed all the blue, there's no longer any in there, then I'm going to start noticing it going towards yellow. So I could pull this over here. Now they look a little more brownish in their horse color. This one also makes it go towards magenta or towards green, or you could think of it as away from those two colors. Right now the horses might look a little bit magenta. I could tune them in. There's all sorts of other things we could do. So here's one color-wise. First off, what I notice in this image is it just feels somewhat dull. It's kind of hard to describe why or what, but if I look at the histogram, I can tell right away. Do you see a big gap on the right side? Nothing anywhere close to white. So this is when you could grab highlights, but highlights can only pull things so far, and I can get it, that's maxed out. You see the bar chart, how it's just barely touching the end? So it's a matter of when you have a big gap on the end. That's when I go for the sledgehammer, the whites. Okay? And so I'll bring that over until, I'm not even looking at the picture, I'm looking at the bar chart. Bring it over until it hits, heck, bring it over until it becomes almost a spike back off. That's about the highest I'd want to go. It didn't become a big spike. And now I just know that's the highest. Now I look at the picture and I say, okay, 59 is the highest I want to go, because beyond that we'll make a spike and we lose detail. Now I'm going to back off on it and just watch the picture and say, yeah, I think it looked good all the way up at 59. But I just move it down to say, does it look best at that max or a little less? So if you want to see before and after so far, there's before, there's after. To me, it doesn't look as dull anymore. Now, I don't always go for shadow detail. Sometimes it's nice having almost black shadows. It gives you more drama in the image, more going on. If you always show detail everywhere, it starts looking generic in some ways. So I don't mind that I don't see detail there. It's if there was something in that shadow that was important, detail, that if I didn't see wouldn't look good, like a horse. All right, but then this one, it's just the color looks funky to me. The sky looks somewhat normal, but this stuff at the bottom, this is Iceland. Iceland is not that color. Iceland is green. Okay? So I'm going to go over here to my color, and let's see what we can do. First, looking at that and looking at the four colors we have right here. We have blue, yellow, green, magenta. If I think of there being too much of anything in the bottom portion of the image, and I'm not sure, I'm just guessing, but there's a lot of yellow down there. Is there not? And let's just see what happens. We move it away from yellow. Oh, that's the green coming in. Iceland's green. That's more Iceland. Then let's just see what happens when we move to the bottom. I don't know. I look at it and I can't tell if it's too much of one or the other. But if I move it, I can tell, whoa, that's too much. What you can do is move it until you can see the best separation in the colors. Meaning if you have too much of something, it means that Just think about it like spices and cooking or something. If you dump too much of something into a pot and stir it around, you can't taste anything other than the thing you have too much of. Does that make sense? You get it down to just the right amount of that spice, and then I can taste, yes, that spice, but I can also taste the others so that you can taste the flavor variation. Same thing is true with color. Put way too much of one color in. It's too yellow. Everything in the picture looks so yellow that I can't tell if there's any other color there. But get it just right, and it's where all the other colors seem to come out. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when I'm moving this around, I'm going to look for when do I see the most variation in color. Because if this is moved way over here, I'm ignoring the sky, looking at the bottom portion, I can't see a lot of variation in the color because it's so yellow. But when I start getting it over here, I can see the difference now between the greens and the almost blackish things that are around it. If I move it too far the other way, now everything's looking blue. I can't see the difference between the greens and the blackish things around them. So try to find the one that makes it come out the most, the colors separate the most. And I can do the same thing with the other. They're starting to look too similar. Go the other way. Okay, where are they starting to separate? Something. Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is if you can see anything in your picture that should be a shade of gray. And by shade of gray, I'm not talking about the gray you generically think of. I'm thinking about anything that would be in a black and white photo, which means black is a shade of gray. It's not blue, it's not yellow, it's a shade of gray. White is a shade of gray. Most people think of a generic middle gray. Think of something that should not have color. That's a shade of gray. If you can find one of those, then you can grab this eyedropper and click on that thing, this little guy. And it will move those same two sliders we've been playing with until the thing you clicked on truly is a shade of gray, meaning it does not have any color. It's not bluish, not yellowish. So I'm not sure if this will work, but I'm going to click right here. Boom. And it just adjusted the image so that area is neutral. It has no color. And I can try a couple different areas to see if it'll do it. But if it's something, I think that rock, it's a lava-like rock, is close to a gray. So let's see before and after on this one. Here is before, here's after. I don't know that I like the sky, but I like the bottom a lot more. If you've ever been to Iceland, Iceland looks like that, not this. Okay. Now the sky, I could, that's the brightest part of the picture, isn't it? So I could bring the highlights down. And this is when vibrance is going to mess us up because, most likely, it's going to make blues even bluer and it's going to make it look ridiculous. I could bring vibrance down. That will mellow out the blues. But there are other things we haven't talked about yet that could fix that.